Hey everyone, welcome to RotoWire Fantasy Football Live. Looking forward to hanging out with you again. Remember, this show runs 5 days a week. We take off Thursday and Friday, so I won't see you till Saturday. Whenever you miss a show, you can always go back to RotoWire YouTube and catch the replay. Have a great guest on every day, so you won't want to miss the fantasy analysis of the great guest. And I'll be going over fantasy strategy, news, and notes, getting you ready for those fantasy football drafts. If you've been liking this show, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. If you are on RotoWire YouTube, it'll let the company, my bosses, know if it's something that you value. It'd be helpful to me. Also on social media, if you could give me a follow at Jim Coventry NFL, that'd be greatly appreciated. I am posting 5 or so player threads each week, giving you the best information I can so that you can make your best decision on draft day. And finally, stay tuned to the end of the show. I will have Doug Orth of FF today to talk player analysis. Good morning, Albert. All right, fantasy football news from training camps. Cooper Kupp, MRI on the hamstring. They are not messing around after Tuesday's practice. Adam Schefter breaks that news, of course. So Cooper Kupp, look, he obviously missed half of the season last year. Before the injury in PPR, he was the wide receiver, one in a points per game basis. He wasn't playing at the level he played in the mother of all seasons he had in 2021, but we knew that wasn't going to happen. But the injury is concerning because I talk about this frequently. Every year as I do my research and I'm looking up many things about players, one of the things I always chart are player ages. And every year it's depressing to see how few running backs and receivers are playing at a high level into their 30s. Now, there are some players who completely change their game. Think of Larry Fitzgerald. And these Hall of Fame type guys, they often can get a little more mileage out, but they often have to change their game. And if a player is unable to do that, the end comes quickly. But one of the things that is important for everybody to know as to why players are fizzling out in their 30s, it's largely recovery from injury. It takes much longer to return from injuries that may have been a week or two. They drag out on and on. And it's a very difficult process for players. As I forgot to move my microphone right here, I apologize to get this audio going better than we did. So with Cooper Kupp, it's simple. We worry about the age. The timing of the injury is not good. Now, the team expects it's a few weeks. They're thinking they expect there'll be a chance for him to be back week 1, and he certainly may be on the field for week 1. There's no reason to think he may not make it back. But if he happens to come across what Keenan Allen's situation was last year, remember Keenan Allen right around 30 last year, he injures that hamstring, and I know they rushed him back a little bit, but he played 44 snaps through week 10. We'll talk about Keenan Allen later today, but that's just an example. And we'll talk about DeAndre Hopkins later today. And we've noticed in his career, he never missed time. But when he got right around 30, all of a sudden, 2 years ago, he's missing time. Last year, even with the suspension, he missed time. And some of these injuries can't be, missed. They're knee injuries. And you can't really, fool with that. But it's just a propensity for injury and recovery. So Cooper Kupp, look, early in the preseason, I was extremely high on him. The offensive line should be very much better. They were decimated preseason last year in Los Angeles. But what we have now is the line is back healthy. Logan Bruss was a good draft pick for them. He didn't play. He's stepping in. They pick up Steve Avila in the second round, the 5th pick of the draft. He projects to be a good interior lineman for them. So there is very good possibility that this line is good. Joe Noteboom has been on and off at tackle. He can be really good, not always consistent. Obviously, the days of Andrew Whitworth are gone, but the line should be good enough. Matthew Stafford, I'm certain, is going to be in an offense where McVay wants the ball out quickly. We know that Stafford has had back and neck injuries in the last 2 seasons. McVay knows this. He knows the defense is going to be awful. It's Aaron Donald and a really rugged crew. So the Rams are going to be giving up points this year. Now, one thing McVay can do is he can coach up offense, but we definitely need Kupp on the field because, see, the thing with Kupp is he's irreplaceable. And I want to point back to years ago when Tyreek Hill was going to serve a suspension, and the Chiefs drafted Mecole Hardman like in the 3rd round. And when they drafted him, people were saying, yeah, he's got like Tyreek level type speed, and he's going to, step in and do these things with Mahomes. And I told people, pump the brakes here. Tyreek Hill is like a small room Hall of Fame type guy. I'm not saying he's in the Hall of Fame, but the skill set and the way he changes the game, you don't see this. So, yeah, you could bring another fast dude in, but a fast dude is not Tyreek Hill. And we learned very quickly that was the case with Hardman. And, he was unjustly criticized for that because he wasn't Tyreek Hill. Well, duh, who is, right? Well, Cooper Kupp is kind of the same deal. So what do we get here? Well, with Cooper Kupp is an outlier. He is that player that he reads the defense. Matthew Stafford reads it at the same time. The option routes they have. If the defense leverages one way, the ball is already released. Kupp makes that break instantaneously. The ball is there, making Kupp unstoppable. Kupp can block. That's how he got on the field early in his career. He's versatile, and he can run any route from any position in the tree. So there is no lateral replacement for Cooper Kupp, like there was no lateral replacement for Tyreek Hill. Completely different players, but both completely irreplaceable. If Kupp is out, the Rams are screwed because they have no ability to consistently move the ball through the air. I know Van Jefferson's a name that comes up. He's largely been used as a situational deep threat in his career. He hasn't had a lot of opportunity. Maybe he does a little something, but we saw last year. And Baker Mayfield was good at getting in the ball, so he had some 40 to 50-yard games. But I really don't know that if Van Jefferson is in a lead role in an offense, that a number one corner isn't just going to shut him down. I think when teams played the Rams last year with Baker Mayfield, they just didn't take them seriously, weren't showing up, and they some players got some yardage that was just kind of there. And Ben Skowronek, a very good blocker, but that's what he is. He's a blocker. Tutu Atwell, a gadget guy they could use for some stretch plays. Demarcus Robinson, he had a little comeback last year, but he isn't more than at best a 40 or so yard per game guy. And Puka Nacua gets all this talk. Look, I get it. I hear it. He's a 6th round draft pick. He may be something, but a lot of these players that have college flash and even preseason flash, how often does a 6th round draft pick, the Rams fooled everybody, nobody knew about this Puka Nacua guy, he was a 2nd round talent? No, he wasn't a 2nd round talent. He's a little slow for the NFL. From a measurable standpoint, the jump he's making from where he was at in college to where he's going in the NFL, he is going to struggle. So will he have a game or two? It could happen, but I would not put stock. People are drafting him like 18th round of best ball leagues, all buzz and hype. 6th round draft pick. It's a lottery ticket at best. So if Kupp is out, very worried for Rams office. Tyler Higbee will get a lot of short passes, a lot of dump offs to keep Stafford healthy. So early on, it's a PPR boost to Higbee. Cam Akers, I do think we had 3 different seasons out of him last year. I think he's somewhere in the middle. I think the Rams, with their offensive line back healthy, with some of the scheme up that McVay can run, I think Cam Akers is going to get a lot of 3-down work, and I think his floor is going to be high. Defense will give him a little trouble, but I think he'll catch some screen passes. So from a PPR standpoint for productivity, don't expect Akers to, take down the house, but he's going to at least be good for you based on volume. They really don't have anybody else they trust. They wanted Kyren Williams to be a thing. KJ Frederick's in the house talking a little bit about the Rams. And so with the Rams, basically, fading them right now is not the worst idea in the world. Matthew Stafford is one good hit from saying, you know what, I've had enough. And again, we'll see what happens with Kupp. I'm so optimistic, but again, it's just troubling to be, about 30 years old and have a hammy injury. He may be fine. And his draft stock will go back a little bit. Some people were drafting him as high as the wide receiver 3. I think now he probably goes closer to the turn. And if he plays, he's always going to be a value. But again, there's concerns here. All right, let's compete for a shot at $250,000 and a free RotoWire subscription. You can play me against me in the Beat Jim Coventry 3 NFFC draft. That's on Tuesday, August 15th, 8 p.m. Eastern. If you want to sign up, this draft's going to be live streamed. Also, everybody in here will be talked about. Your draft strategy will be talked about. It'll be so much fun. And also, if you want to sign up, I did finally pin this to my Twitter profile at Jim Coventry NFL. Would love to compete against you. Reach out to me if you do. DM me. Let me know you're in the league. Definitely want to highlight your draft when I do these shows as well. Dallas Cowboys news is next. So Malik Davis is set to go into week 1 as the primary backup to Tony Pollard. Not a surprise, but the thing was Ronald Jones got popped for a PED suspension for 2 games. Not that Ronald Jones was going to be much of a factor, but for Malik Davis, it was competition. Well, to start the season, it's Malik Davis. And the Cowboys have been very aggressively avoiding bringing backs in. Other teams are bringing veterans in, looking at them. Some people are whispering around, maybe Zeke Elliott comes back. I think the pride is not going to allow that to happen. I don't think Zeke Elliott is going to, give up the money he had, which he already did. That money's gone, and then come back on some low deal. I just think from a pride standpoint, that's not one, because he'll have opportunities to go somewhere. And I just think he may be better off with a change of scenery. Zeke's done, but he can still be an innings eater, I call it. He can get some grind out carries, goal line carries. He could be very useful. Good morning, Carla. He could be very useful in an early down role somewhere. But anyway, Deuce Vaughn, tiny dude. He has to be a complete outlier. People talk about Darren Sproles. There was one Darren Sproles. They broke the mold when they made Darren Sproles. And there have been so many guys that come in. Tariq Cohen, the human joystick, not Darren Sproles. Deuce Vaughn, his time was like 4.5. You would think it's better. He's like a 5.5 dude. He's like tiny. So first of all, from that standpoint, his touches are going to be severely limited. It's going to be like a gadget role, and they'll want him on the field in that capacity. But I think to expect any fantasy consistency week to week, I don't think there's a world where that's coming. Maybe in a couple years, if he acclimates in, they figure him out, it'll work. Back to Malik Davis. So Malik Davis right now, if you're picking in a deeper league where you have a lot of bench spots, he's going off the board as a running back 73, which means he's undrafted in almost every league. 232 picks in. But look, there is a clear path to work for him should the unfortunate happen and Tony Pollard miss time. Now, remember, Tony Pollard is 209 pounds, and we like that, but he's like 6 foot. So with the BMI, it's not an optimal BMI. Dallas, based on beat reporters, want to give him 20 carries a game, but there's a lot of scenarios where that doesn't work. So should Pollard miss time, Malik Davis does not have a lot of competition. The veterans out there may not be coming in for these bargain basement deals. So it's a flyer on Malik Davis, who has a clear path to work. And look, volume is king in fantasy football. How many running backs have we seen who are simply not good, who are very productive? Atlanta Falcons news is next. Just a quick one here. Kyle Pitts had that knee injury. It knocked him out at the end of last season, and he's back running routes now for the first time this summer. Very, very encouraging. Now, remember last year, though, 10 games, he only went over 30 yards 3 times. Here was the problem as I saw it. They were using him on way too many downfield routes. He's good at those, but they had like Marcus Mariota. I'm sorry I laughed as I said that. Marcus Mariota throwing ball, who's very inaccurate downfield and very, very, yips. And that was not going to work. And realistically, when you have these players, you need like that diet of targets where you have some short, some intermediate, you pad the stats, you get the receptions, you break a run after the catch here and there. But just taking these downfield shots, he had 2 decent games, and that was it. So basically, he's the tight end 5 on average per fantasymojo.com, my go-to for ADP. But what you need to understand with Pitts is this. It's not about Pitts. Pitts is a transcendent talent. Nobody who knows what they're doing questions that part. It's Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith likes his positionless football, but I think he got enamored with the speed and the mismatches of Pitts going downfield. I don't know how good of a downfield passer Desmond Ridder is. It may be slightly better than Marcus Mariota, but remember, Ridder dropped in the draft for a reason. And so if we're going to look at this, the problem becomes, will Arthur Smith make Pitts that fully functional weapon who catches the ball in all different situations to give him the numbers that he needs for that successful season? So realistically, I have no confirmation he's going to do that. And so if you're drafting him as the tight end 5, you are doing that with the expectation it will happen. Drake London put up very nice stats while Pitts was out, and Ridder had that time to develop great chemistry with him. That may mean nothing, but it also may mean something. That comfort level may have already gotten in there with London, who was getting those short and intermediate targets. And from a wingspan catch radius standpoint, every bit as impressive as Kyle Pitts. I'm a commissioner of many leagues, but there's one 12-team league. Everybody's spread out all over the map, different time zones, families, and getting a date on that calendar for that draft is like nearly impossible to do. RotoWire came out with a scheduler. If you go to rotowire.com/scheduler, you could try that tool. It'll help you figure out how to get that draft all set up for success. Remember, you're hanging into the bottom of the hour. We got Doug Orth from FF Today coming in. Great football mind, great friend. One more piece of news before we get to the wide receivers to avoid everybody hates that part of the show. But we have to talk about it. All right, last piece of news. This is a quick one. Hunter Henry has been Mac Jones's go-to guy in the red zone during training camp. This is not a surprise. 2 years ago, when the New England offense was somewhat functional and Mac Jones was the starting quarterback, Hunter Henry was a very good weapon in the end zone for Mac Jones. Now, word out is they're neighbors. So they probably work and talk football all the time. That's something to be said for that. All right. And the chemistry they had, the friendship they likely have, that carries over. When you're in that situation, you know where he's going to be, and you talk about situations, because that's what football players do. The cognitive ones, you're talking about, like Randy Moss. He'd always talk through the situations. What are we doing in this situation, that situation? I assume Hunter Henry and Mac Jones are doing this. Now, Mike Gesicki is going off the board as tight end 21, and Henry is tight end 33. I don't think either of them are very viable, though. Gesicki is a glorified wide receiver. We all know that. He's not a blocker. And when they're going to run these two tight end sets, Gesicki is going to run significantly more routes than Henry. But the problem becomes at tight end, you need touchdowns, right? And if Henry ends up being that guy in the red zone, that cannibalizes the part of Gesicki's game where you elevate those numbers. So I think both will be okay from an NFL standpoint, but I don't know that we're going to get a whole lot of them for fantasy. Now, of course, if the receiver situation in New England goes out, if Tyquan Thornton doesn't take a step up, and he had opportunities last year, but I'm hopeful they utilize his speed better. Devontae Parker's often missing time. So there's a lot of questions throughout the receiver room. Now, Juju Smith-Schuster, I'll get off this quickly here. Juju Smith-Schuster is interesting because last year with Kansas City, look, he's a zone buster, and that was good because KC saw a lot of zone. But Patrick Mahomes isn't going to just look for the quick thing in the zone to win. He's going to look to see where he could take advantage of something with a little bit of a deeper level, and then he might come back. But by that time, the work that Juju did was like undone. He had a good string of games early on, and then he got hurt, and then it kind of faded off. So there was some potential there. But I think overall, this is better. They're going to, with Bill O'Brien as the OC, they're going to run some RPO concepts. But I think against the zones, Mac Jones is going to be one who identifies. I think this is a very good situation for Juju Smith-Schuster. I think it was better than a situation with the late career Ben Roethlisberger. I think it was definitely better, believe it or not, because how would it be better than playing with the Chiefs where they score a gazillion points, right? But I just think the way he fits, Mahomes always wanted that guy that could give you a little bit more. And I do think here, though, he could have a very high target count and reception count. The yardage won't go through the roof, but you're getting him in the double-digit rounds. And at this point now, if he's catching 80 balls, even if it's for 900 yards, you could take that at that point of a draft. And I believe he has that in him. All right. So we are going to talk wide receivers to avoid in 2023. Now, understand this. Everybody hates this part of the show because I'm going to talk about players that I love, that you love, and you're going to be like, you hear this name, you're going to be like, Coventry, you're crazy. Why would we fade this guy? It's never about, well, it's often never about the player. It's often about where the player is being selected in drafts or team situations. Oh, and Uncle Ted tells us to fade all the Vikings. Justin Jefferson is going to take a bit of offense with that, Uncle Ted. Love Justin Jefferson. Anyway, Amon-Ra St. Brown's the first. Okay, I know you love him. You love Amon-Ra St. Brown, and you should love him. He has been a very fun player to watch in his first 2 years of his career. The first year, he wasn't, brought in heavily. He came in middle of the season. Remember that late season run. Hockenson was out. I don't even remember who the receivers were, but they were all injured. It was the Amon-Ra St. Brown show for like 6 weeks. And for those 6 weeks, it was like 12, 14 targets, and he cleaned up. And it was a great end of the season. And last year, he was very good. Very, very good. But remember this. And again, I know he started out slowly in that rookie year, but I think that the targets he got late made up for that. He's basically been about an 1,150-yard guy and about a 5 to 6 touchdown guy. Now, all right, some people say third-year boost. I think we've seen what Amon-Ra St. Brown is. I don't think there's another. He's very good. I don't think there's another level beyond this. First of all, he's not going to consistently make big plays. He's a prototypical, phenomenal slot player. But here's the thing. He has often been the only game in town. The Lions have had some really garbage wide receivers around him. They did have Hockenson for half a season last year. When they lost him, certainly that helps. But now this year, all right, maybe it's not a lot better, right? But Sam Laporta is going to see some targets. Now, Hockenson saw him so he can make that lateral write-off, right? But Jahmyr Gibbs, if they're talking about using him the way that they plan on using that high first-round draft pick on him, my guess is they're not just using him as a dump-off screen guy. And the receiving game is what makes him special. I believe that they plan on using him on routes. But where are those routes going to be? In the middle of the field. That's going to take some targets from Amon-Ra St. Brown. And look, when you put St. Brown and Gibbs together, as beautiful a player as Amon-Ra St. Brown is, Gibbs is immensely more explosive. So there could be a little bit of cannibalization of targets. And then Jameson Williams, after 6 weeks, he comes back. He's an outside receiver, so he's not redundant with them. But that's going to be the first really good outside receiver that they've had. And I know he caught one ball last year, but when you saw him on film, his speed is game-changing. And so I just think that Amon-Ra St. Brown, people are taking him, his ADP for fantasymojo.com. Wide receiver 8, pick 12. He goes as pick 10, I see him, but he almost always goes at the turn. If you're going to tell me I could get Garrett Wilson, I believe that Garrett Wilson's floor, remember 1,100 yards with no quarterbacks last year. His floor is Amon-Ra St. Brown's ceiling. And then obviously Garrett Wilson has a potential ceiling coming, right? And so to me, he's ahead of St. Brown. So that's one reason I have to do not avoid us. But the other one is we take a look at Devontae Adams. Now, right, Jimmy Garoppolo's there, and we're not sure. But remember, we saw last year, Derek Carr, they got rid of him after week 14. He puts up 1,500 yards. I have to think Devontae Adams is ahead of him. So, again, I think St. Brown, beautiful player, but I think we are taking him as a player that has the upside of others. He hasn't proven or shown that he has that. He's a floor play, but I don't think you want a floor play in the first round of your draft. Hey, if you love the show, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. If you're on RotoWire YouTube, I'd be appreciative. We'd let us know if the show is useful or beneficial to you. Please give me a follow on socials at Jim Coventry NFL. I'm doing those Twitter threads about 5 days a week, going over players that you can get information on the draft and fantasy football. Keenan Allen is next. Again, another phenomenal player, great career. And when he came back after week 10 last year, he was on a tear. PPR machine, right? At least 86 yards in 6 of his last 9 games, including the playoffs. He didn't go less than 49 in any of those games. And so in his targets, 9 or more in 6 of his last 7 games. What's not to like, right? All right. He's 31. And last year, and I talked about this at the top of the show with Cooper Kupp, recovery from injury. And I know Brandon Staley was, roundly criticized for trying to bring him back early, Keenan Allen. The fact is, at 30 years old last year, a hamstring injury in week 1, he plays 44 snaps through week 10. Soft tissue injuries, recovery from injury, and I mentioned earlier, there are very few players in their 30s at running back and receiver that aren't on the decline or on their way out. Keenan Allen's not on his way out, but here's the other problem. Kellen Moore. This offense in Los Angeles has run through a slot receiver and a running back, Austin Eckler, for years. With Mike Williams, and listen, everybody says Mike, he misses time, he's always out. Last year he missed time. 5 years ago or so as a rookie, he missed time. The 3 years in between, 15 and 16 games played. Look through his log. Now there's a couple games in there. He got injured in game. Happens. But he is on the field most of the time, other than his first year and the recency of last year. But he is contested catch guy. He's not a 50-50 guy. 75, 25, 80, 20. He is a winner. And that's offense, I think, is going to be more downfield. Quentin Johnston's in the equation, and you might not think much of him, but I'll tell you what about Quentin Johnston. They're going to be able to just use him on slant routes, get him going after the catch, because Quentin Johnston is not going to see much in the way of coverage. It's going to be very, very beneficial. So I think Keenan Allen, although a very good player, being drafted as the wide receiver 17, I don't believe Keenan Allen any longer has that floor, or that ceiling, I should say, where he is the guy in the offense. I think that those days are a bit gone. And again, the potential for recovery from injury is problematic. Again, very good player. I can't take him as a wide receiver 17 because I do think things change. While I get ready to bring Doug Orth, and I'm going to be at the Fantasy Football Expo, so is Doug. And the weekend's going to be in Canton, Ohio. It's going to be August 11th to 13th. Everyone can come out to the Expo weekend. If you want to buy tickets for that, you go to thefantasyfootballexpo.com. Now, RotoWire is going to have a booth there, and I'll be in a few of the expert panel discussions. And if you go to the Expo weekend, make sure you find us and say hello. We'd love to talk to you. We always like to meet people and talk some football and things like that. Doug, I'm winding down a couple of receivers here. I'm going to introduce you now. If you don't mind sticking with me for a couple of receivers and then getting into your players, can we do that?
Sure thing.
All right. So Doug Orth, good friend of mine. I've been in the Kings Classic with Doug since 2018. It's been a great experience. Met him that first year and became fast friends. Talked football, respect his football mind. He's the creator of the preseason matchup analysis and the big boards at FF Today. He's been playing high-stakes fantasy football for over 20 years, hasn't had a losing season, and he won a Kings Classic. So what a heck of a resume there. Doug, I'm going to go to these couple receivers I need to finish up on, but any initial words to say to everybody before we get started?
Well, you just promoted the Expo, and guys, I'm with Jim here. Highly encourage it. I've been going every year since it started. Started out as 70 people that first year in a very small, intimate gathering. And I know that Bob Long, who's the organizer of that thing, he wants 1,000 people in through the hotel lobby this year. So just everything Jim said. You can't say enough nice things about the event.
Yeah, it's going to be wonderful. Now, Doug, I'm going through some wide receivers to avoid. I went through a couple. I'm going to give a quick little piece on Christian Watson here, and then I'm going to have you jump in, and then we'll get to the players you're highlighting for us today. So I'm going to make my case for Christian Watson. He's going Fantasy Mojo ADP is wide receiver 21. Here's my thing. We know he had the incredible stretch of games last year between weeks 10 and 13. 323 yards, 49 rushing yards, and 8 touchdowns. He was still good down the stretch, but the league already made adjustments to him. He was held to 46 to 49 yards, didn't score in that span, so adjustments were made quickly. He does have difference-making speed, But we even have seen it with Jamar Chase. Teams put a lid over the top and they take away those big plays. The league is not giving up the big plays they did in the past when they know teams can do that. So my thing is this. He has the speed, but he owes a significant downgrade. And I don't know what Jordan Love will be, but anybody's a downgrade from Aaron Rodgers for the most part. And the other thing is, I am not a fan of the short and intermediate route running of Christian Watson. And so I think if he doesn't have the ability to get big plays consistently, I don't think they're there. I think there's too much uncertainty. Don't see him as a wide receiver 21. Doug, any words on Christian Watson?
I'm with you. Almost any quarterback's a downgrade from Aaron Rodgers. I was in the boat of Jordan Love needed a developmental year when he came out of Utah State. And I guess, you could say he's had 3, right? But no, I think his natural athleticism is going to get him certain things. And I know some people will remember him running a drag route and taking that to the house a time or two last year. Look, just like you said, with his deep speed, teams make adjustments. And I don't think Jordan Love is in his 80 some odd pass attempts over 3 years. I don't think he's earned the benefit of the doubt yet. So wide receiver 21 is too rich for me.
So Doug and I will not be owning shares. Again, like the player, like some possibilities, but not that ADP. The last one, and some people are going to hate me for this one. I know this. Rightfully, people love DeAndre Hopkins. He's been a great, great player for a long time. Now, what I've noticed with Hopkins, again, I keep talking about these players in their 30s. He'll be 31. He hadn't missed games most of his career. And then 2 years ago, misses 6 games. Last year, he did have a suspension, still missed 2 games at the end of the season, getting nicked up when he never used to. Now, he was never a big yards after the catch guy, but 14th percentile yards after the catch last year. He did do well for fantasy. He was force-fed and funneled targets, 10.6 targets per game. So, yes, you're going to finish as a wide receiver 1 when you're getting that target volume and you catch everything in sight, even if you're not getting yardage afterwards. But here's the thing. I don't think Tennessee could have been a worse landing spot for him. They are going to run the ball with Derrick Henry. They're well coached by Mike Vrabel. The defense did get some bodies back from injury. They are going to compete. They're going to hang in games. They went on a 7-game losing streak to end the season, but I think this team is going to hang in. And here's the other problem. DeAndre Hopkins steps into the situation. Well, when Ryan Tannehill is going well, it's this play action stuff, these slants, these things that get yards after the catch. I just don't think he's going to need that perimeter guy to get these possession catches. And I'm not convinced a 31-year-old DeAndre Hopkins is not a better option than Treylon Burks. And Paul Kuharsky, who followed the Titans for years, was a beat writer at times. He sees Burks and Hopkins as the co-number ones. And if you're going to tell me that Hopkins is going off the board as the wide receiver 22 in a run-based offense where he may be not the clear alpha anymore, great player, great career, propensity to get hurt in his 30s, and I just think not enough targets with Burks there, I'm out. Doug?
You can tell yourself a story that the volume is going to be there, that the between Burks and Hopkins, they're going to see 50% of the targets. You can tell yourself that story. I'm not going to tell myself that story. I think there's a legitimate chance that Burks outperforms Hopkins. I'm not going to say it's a high chance, but I'm going to say there's a definite chance. You nailed it with what Tannehill specializes in. It's going to be one of those things where if Hopkins is going to live up to his draft cost, he's going to have to get fumbled targets. And just like you said, even with Tim Kelly, the new OC coming in there, I'm not sure that the overall identity of that offense changes much. And why would it? So until Derrick Henry becomes a 3.5 yard per carry back, I don't see why you would change the offense. So I think a lot of things have to go right for him to realize wide receiver 2 upside.
Will you have shares of DeAndre Hopkins?
It's going to have to be a value. I'm certainly, he's not one of those guys I'm going to reach for.
Makes sense. All right. The reason Doug here is today is to tell us about players that he is targeting in fantasy football and why. Doug's going to turn loose to shine in this. I'm going to say very little about this because I want Doug to get his opinions through. We're going to go one player in each position. Doug, so based on Fantasy Mojo ADP, the quarterback 15, pick 149 this year is Geno Smith, 32 years old, I believe, coming off a career year. Why do you like Geno Smith this year?
Well, let me begin by asking you a question, Jim.
Yes.
How often does a quarterback who is attached to 3 receivers typically drafted inside the first 7 rounds of fantasy drafts fall?
You're right. If you're going to have 3 receivers who are going to perform at that rate, the quarterback has to be it has to be a top 10 guy, right?
You're right. So I said, even though preseason consistency is hardly gospel, I'm going to guess the answer to that question is not very often. I just wrapped up a 3-part series on depth of throws for quarterbacks and depth of targets for pass catchers, and it was enlightening to say the least. As it relates to this discussion, Geno Smith was last season's highest graded deep thrower, deep passes being those that traveled at least 20 yards in the air. This is an important stat because deep targets are the most valuable for fantasy. It seems unlikely that Smith will decline much in that area now that Smith has 3 receivers that scare defenses. The last point I'm going to make in favor of Geno is his rushing upside. No, he's not quite in the class of Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, Josh Allen in that regard, but he did finish 8th among quarterbacks with 366 yards on the ground last year. Trio receivers as good as what he has in Seattle right now. It should come as no surprise if the Seahawks roll out 11 personnel more than they ever have under Pete Carroll, something I think OC Shane Waldron has wanted to do since coming over from the Rams a few years ago. And I think it's very favorable odds that Smith's going to throw more than 572 times, the 572 times he did last year.
So that's a great case for Geno Smith. Again, you couldn't have better weapons, and we do like the fact they've addressed that offensive line. I do think that is a player to consider. Doug Orth is definitely on him, and I love the case you lay out, Doug. Next, running back 19, pick 57. Little bit of strife with the contract, which is going to be interesting here. I don't know if he has any leverage at all, but you're going to tell us a little bit about J.K. Dobbins. Before you start, Doug, I want to say the last 4 games of the season, they were against divisional opponents. I want to say he averaged 7.5 yards per carry. It's the first time he looked kind of healthy all year. That was pretty sick. But talk about J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, so I think he's suffering from recency bias right now, to be honest. The last 2 images or news items we have, major news items regarding Dobbins that we have are the videos of his inability to find a second gear on breakaway runs last year and his current unhappiness with contract, kind of like you just said. He's nearing the 2-year anniversary of his severe knee injury, so I don't have many questions in regards to his health, or at least the health of his knee. People are quick to note that he's missed 27 out of possible 50 regular season games since he joined the Ravens in 2020. But people kind of also need to remember that 25 of those missed games were due to the aforementioned knee injury. There's also the well-established logic of highly athletic quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson being unwilling to check it down to running backs. However, there has been an emphasis on Jackson doing that early in camp, perhaps in part because new OC Todd Monken has typically featured a back catching a lot of balls, be it James Cook or Kenny McIntosh over the last 3 years at the University of Georgia, or his last coordinator job in the NFL when Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt combined for 93 targets back in 2019. He's also showed a propensity to lean on one back in his previous NFL play calling stints, assuming the primary back didn't get hurt. I'm going back to Doug Martin on those days. Dobbins would clearly be that guy if Monken stays true to form. He also mentioned wanting to take Lamar Jackson back to his college days at Louisville with considerably more 4-wide sets than the former play caller Greg Roman ever used. Emptying the box for a guy like Dobbins, who was averaging just under 6 yards per carry as an NFL back against defenses expecting to run.
Yep.
Could allow him to set the NFL world on fire, in my opinion.
Yeah, J.K. Dobbins is a huge upside play this year. And I really hope that John Harbaugh gives him the workload he deserves. As a rookie, he was eased in early in the season, but really wasn't topping 15 carries much at all. Last year, he had a couple games with decent carries near the stretch, and then they even backed off of him in the playoff game, which that was a little bit foolish in my opinion. But I do hope that that expands because J.K. Dobbins is a superstar player who just needs a little bit more favorable situation. Doug Orth outlines the case where that may just be taking place. Now, Doug, a receiver you don't have to sell me on, Elijah Moore. And you know, Doug, that in his last 5 games as a rookie, he averaged 5 catches, 76 yards, and he scored 5 touchdowns in those 6 games. 4.35 wheels, incredible agility, and then the train wreck last year. But he's now going off the board, fantasymojo.com ADP, wide receiver 43, pick 92. Sell people on Elijah Moore.
Well, I wanted to remind people here. I wanted to try to choose non-obvious guys because I'm sure you've done enough of these over the last couple of weeks that we touch on some of the obvious guys. I'm not really sure what we can take away from last year with Moore. I think the combined frustration of being overtaken by Garrett Wilson, playing with Zach Wilson, and his reported disdain for my OC Mike LaFleur got into his head last year, or at least that's what I'm going to tell myself. We did see Elijah Moore dominate for an extended stretch in 2021, kind of like you said. He posted a 1.95 yards per route run on perimeter routes, which ranked 3rd for rookies that year behind Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle. We're talking about a talented guy here. To hear the beat writers tell what is going on in camp right now, Moore might as well be the second coming of Deebo Samuel with all the ways he's being used in the offense. The creativity that it sounds like they're having, and that's more imagination than LaFleur ever showed with him or the Jets ever did with him. Deshaun Watson is a considerable upgrade to what Moore had to work with in New York over the last couple of years. That be the group including Joe Flacco, again, Zach Wilson, and Mike White. Add in the play calling acumen of head coach Kevin Stefanski over the years. I need to change one thing. 1 second. Sorry. My other microphone just came on.
Gotcha. So while Doug is fixing this, during camp, they were running Elijah Moore as an X receiver at times. They were running him out of the backfield on some sweep plays. They were getting him very involved and integrated. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah. So, like I said, so I was talking about the play calling acumen of Stefanski and his reported desire to make this a Watson-friendly offense. And I think we have a player capable of fishing as the top 30 receiver in Elijah Moore. I'll go so far as to say that one of the reasons I'm down on Amari Cooper is because I think Elijah Moore can and maybe will outperform him.
Very possible. I also think there's a world, and look, they're paying Watson $250 million guaranteed dollars. I believe, and I've also heard a beat reporter confirm this after I brought it up myself. I believe the base is three wide receivers. I don't think this is a run first offense anymore. I think it's a pass centric offense. I think Nick Chubb is going to benefit greatly by seeing legitimate light boxes for the first time in his career. I think this offense could stun us. And maybe aside from the Chiefs, there's a world where they compete for being the second best offense in the league. That offensive line is still top 6. So I do see a scenario where that happens. Doug, the last player you want to talk about today is a player who was a college wide receiver. He was on a 3-year track and made great strides. And that's about the time you would expect. Juwan Johnson had a bunch of 50-yard games. I believe it was like week 7 to 15. He caught almost all of his touchdown passes, but he was a factor. Yet they bring in Foster Moreau, who I see as a blocker. He fell to tight end 20 in average draft position. Wow. Tell us about Juwan Johnson.
Yeah, you stole my first point with the first thing you said there.
Crap. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm going to admit a bit of personal bias with them because I liked him as an oversized wide receiver prospect when I first saw him at the University of Oregon. He was at Penn State before that, by the way. But when I first saw him, he was at the University of Oregon. My hopes for him grew when he signed as an undrafted free agent with the Saints. Why? Because at least in my mind, he profiled similarly to Marcus Colston, who quickly became a dominant big slot receiver back, what was it, almost 15 years ago now as a youngster. I think you made a solid point in one of your recent shows with Theo Grimminger that Derek Carr is much less likely to stand in against the blitz and deliver a downfield ball than Andy Dalton was. That is going to bode well, obviously, for any tight end. And guess what? Juwan Johnson's a tight end, even though he's a oversized receiver tight end.
Yes.
It's also worth noting that Carr has started just about every game. The Raiders played since 2014. Over that time, tight end position saw at least 100 targets in all but 1 year. Over that same time, the Raiders have featured the likes of Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, and Devontae Adams at receiver. So it's not as if Carr didn't have any other options. So the tight end, he wants to go to the tight end. I went back, when I was doing some research last night, I come across the name Michael Rivera. I haven't heard that name in a while. He made Michael Rivera a fantasy, maybe not a star, but he was definitely a usable tight end one. Anyway, getting back to more of why I like Johnson. One of the offseason nuggets I've read that stood out the most to me regarding Johnson was that he was studying Julian Edelman tape this offseason. It's not very common that 230-pound oversized receivers are going to study tape of retired sub 200-pound slot receivers, right? That's not going to happen by accident. Athletes typically do things like that when they're told to plan on a certain role, and Edelman ran a bunch of choice routes in New England. Further considered that on a team with Christopher Olave and Alvin Kamara last year, Johnson tied Kamara for the team lead in red zone targets with 11 and led the team with 4 targets inside the 10.
So I am with you. I am especially when I'm waiting on tight end. And I'm doing it in a lot of leagues, and I am grabbing Juwan Johnson. I'm backing him up with Irv Smith. If there's a best ball league and a third tight end, Uncle Ted talks about the Dallas tight end. To me, it's Jake Ferguson all day long. I'll take those 3 players and see what happens. We did have one comment in here that I wanted to go back beginning of the show. Cooper Kupp hamstring. Jay Redwise asked if he's still a top 5 pick. All I'll say is this. 30-year-old players, recovery from injury, that is what hinders late career players. You don't recover. Now, he may be back into 3 weeks, but dangerous injuries are like this for older players are problematic. I think right now he has to move toward the turn because of the uncertainty of the recovery, even though it's been optimistic. Doug, any words on that?
All I'll say there is keep a sharp eye on practice reports with that, at least practice participation. If they send him out, if they give him every bit of 2 to 3 weeks, and we have no idea how serious the injury is, but if for some reason the feeling is like they're pushing him back, yeah, I'm dropping him big time. But if I don't see him or read about him practicing for the next 3 or 4 weeks, I'm actually taking that as a positive. I don't want him on the practice field. So it's going to be up to the Rams how they determine his practice availability, how I'm going to handle that situation. So yes, I think he's a top 5 guy, assuming they don't bring him back until maybe the end of August. But yes, if they do, I'm dropping to the turn, and I'm fully expecting missed games during the season.
Right. His ADP will drop a bit, though, because you have a lot of good receivers that first round. A.J. Brown goes after him in a lot of drafts. I mean, some drafts, Tyreek Hill goes after him. And I think at that point, if you've got another superstar who you like, and now you have one guy that you're not sure of, I think sometimes you just make that move. I'm like Doug. I mean, Kupp on PPR points per game before he got hurt was still the wide receiver 1. It wasn't the season he had 2 years ago, but he was still that guy. So when he's on the field, he's lethal. But again, recovery from injury in your 30s, it's a very difficult proposition. And so we just got to be careful with that. Hey, I'd like to thank you, Doug, for coming out and talking football with me. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Now, remember, we're not on Thursday and Friday. I need a couple days off here. I got to have a bit of a life. So join me again Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern on where you're watching it right now. My guest will be another great fantasy analyst, Sam Wagman. Have a great day, everyone.